Quite a lot of people have asked me about post-processing, so that's why I'm sat here rather than out in the field. This video coming up is going to be a quick run through about the way I process my images in Lightroom. So first thing I would say, I'm not an expert. I know my way around Lightroom and Photoshop, but I'm not an expert. Second thing I would say is everybody does things slightly differently, so it's a personal taste of how images are processed. But I'll give it a go, and hopefully you learned something, or at least you see how I process my images. And thanks to all those people who left comments about different types of software that I can use. I asked in my previous video, and you came up trumps, so thanks for all of that. So I'll record the screen when I'm processing, and we'll take it away.
So as you can see, I'm in Lightroom, and I've selected two images to process, quite different. Obviously, the one on the left here, image number 1, is of Snowdon that I took from Aaron a month or so ago. Well, when did I take it? Oh, April. Gosh, time flies. Two months ago. And then the one on the left is one I took recently, New Brighton Lighthouse. Now these are reset to the original form, so original raw setting, apart from the one on the right, which is two images stitched together. But other than that, nothing has been done. And just a quick word about when I'm importing images. So typically when I import images, I'll bring them into the library, so they're in library mode here. And before I do anything, before I even touch them, I press F2 and I rename them. So I have a system of renaming. Yeah, you have to come up with your own system that works for you, but mine is I name a combination of location and date, and then I store them onto my hard drive. So the originals are immediately copied onto a hard drive and an external hard drive. I'm backed up onto another hard drive in folders. So the Lighthouse one, for example, would be sent into a folder under landscapes and under coast, and the mountain one would go in a landscape and mountain. So it just helps me find them. So to get into the processing, which one shall I start with? I'll start with the Lighthouse because it's probably relatively straightforward. So as you can see, it's an image I took down at the beach just after sunset, and it was a silhouette and a reflection of the lighthouse. So before I get into any of the controls, the very first thing I do when I'm processing images is I go to over here on the right, lens corrections, click and click. And all that does is it makes sure that the image gives Lightroom the opportunity to make a couple of very slight alterations to the image based on the lens and the model of the camera, just so that obviously each lens and each camera is slightly different, and the smart people at Adobe have created profiles. It just helps, and I always do that first because, as you can see, if I just click back and forth, you can see it does make a couple of little alterations. And what I wouldn't want to do is process the image and then get to the end and then apply lens corrections, because you might have to then do some further processing. So that's the first thing I do. Next thing, every image is different, but usually I go to my crop tool, which is up here. And in this circumstance, I want to make sure everything is straight. So I click on this tool, the straighten tool, which looks like a spirit level, and just run across the horizon. I know the horizon is flat, so run across 2 points, click, there we go. I now know that my horizon is flat. And actually what I'm looking at now is the lighthouse straight up and down. What I can do, go back into the crop tool, and if I just press O, it cycles through the different overlays, and I think you can see that is fairly straight. There's a line running right through, the lighthouse. Might need a tiny little bit of adjustment, so I'll just rotate that very slightly. But I think that's fairly straight. And that's just a useful tool. So that's not actually processing, is it? That's just getting my images ready. So now I'm ready to start processing. As I said, every image is different and people will process in different ways. But first tools I would use in terms of processing is here under the basic command. And I would look at the ignore exposure and contrast for now, highlight shadows, whites and blacks. This is my preferred style. Click on the whites tool, so on the slider, press Alt at the same time, and I'll just push the whites tool to the right. And you can see as I push it to the right, it shows more and more of the whites being overexposed. So, as you can see, that is a hugely overexposed image. So just push it right back down until I'm just at the point where the whites are starting to show through. So just about there. So as you'd expect, the sun's just gone down here. So you'd expect that to be a little bit overexposed. I then do the same with the blacks. I can already see, because I've got the system set up, I can already see some blue showing here. But this image is quite different because I don't want to bring out all the details in the black. I actually want that to look like a bit of a silhouette. So I'm just going to experiment a little bit. You can see if I push it all the way down, drops into a ridiculous amount of darkness. So I'll just turn that off there. So you can just see, if you click on these arrows in your histogram, it shows you by highlighting in blue where you've lost detail in the blacks. So back down to my blacks here, click on the slider, pushing that back up, and let's see if I bring all the detail back in the blacks. That's not bad. So I want the lighthouse to be in silhouette. I don't want the lighthouse to be too detailed because it's not the center of attention. That's what is the center of attention of the colors in the sky. So now I'll just have a look at highlights and shadows. Probably not going to do too much because I've already adjusted the whites and blacks, but I always just give it a little bit of a tweak to see if I want to alter anything. In this circumstances, I don't. Just a quick tip: if you double click, so I'll show you the extreme. I push highlights right down. If you double click on the word highlights, it recenters to 0. Just have a quick look at shadows. I don't think I want to bring any detail out of the shadows too much. In fact, I'm going to leave that at 0. And I'll come back to exposure and contrast in a second. So out of basic, and next panel is tone curve. Now this is an unusual image because I'm not doing much in tone curve, but I'll probably talk about tone curve a little bit more in the other image. So I'm going to ignore that for now. And then here we have color. Now you have to be a little bit careful with kind of the color controls because the danger is you go over the top and make things look as if it's on speed or something. But as you can see in this image, the predominant two main colors that you can see are blue and orange. So I'm just going to click on the orange and push saturation a little bit. Don't want to go too far. You go too far, it starts to look freaky. In fact, just maybe +4. And then click on the blue. Let's have a look, see if I want to alter the blue. So again, if you go too far, it starts to look unnatural. So I'm just giving it a bit of a push up to help in the process. Now I'm going back to my basics for good reasons. So I've created the basics of what I want. Now I'm going to look at under presence, go to clarity. Again, clarity adds a little bit of sharpness and a little bit of pop to the images, but it's easy to overdo. So if you're anything like me and you're a bit heavy-handed on the mouse and it kind of dives from one end to the other, the best thing to do just reset that, is to click on the slider, but then with your arrow keys on the keyboard, just push it a little bit. So arrow keys on the keyboard, I think maybe 10 plus 10 on clarity is fine. Similar with vibrance, just going to push it a little bit. Don't want it to look like an HDR image, but I do want a little bit of pop. You don't want to go, see that, I think. You do see images like that around, but I think that's way too unnatural. So just a little bit of pop there. And saturation, again, don't get too out of control, but it's just bringing those nice colors out in the sky there. I'm just looking at the sky, quite like the detail. I have noticed, I can see already, there's something there in the sky. So maybe a bit of dust on my lens or a fly or something. So spot removal tool, just give that a click. Tip for noticing dust spots or anything on your image is come down over here just below the image, click visualize spots, and if you push that far enough, there we can see it looks like a dust spot. So just going to use the spot removal tool. If you use your kind of square brackets keys, you can make that kind of target a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller, a little bit bigger. Just click on the dust that is annoying, and Lightroom automatically selects a piece of the image that will clone out that dust spot for you. You can do it manually, you can move that around, but more often than not, Lightroom gets it right. So that dust spot is completely gone. So now I'm going to just punch in a little bit of contrast, not too much, just about enough there. Exposure slightly up a little bit, just to kind of bring some of the lightness back in the sky. But I want this image to look like evening. It is evening, so I don't want it to be too bright. And then I'm just going to have a look at quite often at coastal scenes, particularly of sunset. It's nice to add a bit of warmth into the image. So I'm going to click on the slider, but then use my arrow keys just to bring a little bit of warmth in. So that's not bad at all. So quite pleased with the way that's gone. I'm going to close basic down. Come down to, I never touch split toning. I don't think I've ever used split toning because I don't think it adds anything that you can't do anywhere else. So I ignore that. Come down to detail. Sharpening for me in landscape images is not about sharpening the whole image. It's just usually about the edges. So I'll show you a little trick. I normally punch my sharpening up to about midway on the scale, which actually is probably, in terms of the whole image, too much. But little trick, go down to masking, press Alt, and then slide along, and what it's doing is you're selecting what you want Lightroom to sharpen, and I actually just want it to sharpen the main outlines. So outline of the lighthouse and a little bit of the horizon. So I've only added sharpening to the outside of the lighthouse, and then there's a little bit along the horizon. And then noise reduction. If you have a look at the image, there's actually not too much noise in this image. Hopefully, you might not be able to see this in the YouTube version because kind of the quality of the upload. But I can see on my screen there's a tiny little bit of noise, but not too much. So I'm just going to punch that up a little bit, drops the noise out, and you can see there's a nice sharp edge there where I sharpened it. So the last thing I do when I'm looking at image, so I think I've processed that actually to where I want it. The last thing I will do is just press L on my keyboard, which mutes out the background, and if you press L again, the background goes completely, so you're just seeing the image in isolation. I actually quite like that. I might I'm a little bit distracted. There's some kind of, I don't know what they are, maybe people or a boat or something on the horizon there, which is catching my eye at the corner of the image a little bit. So I might just go back to my crop tool and crop out a little bit like that. However, I want the lighthouse to remain in the middle of the image, so I'm just going to check if I can move that. Just going to crop that a little bit more, move that again, and I've just about there. So I think kind of the processing for that one is done. I just do a quick check of before and after. So there's before. So if you press the / key on your keyboard, it goes back to the original state. Press it again after, or you can click on the button there and you can put them side by side. So there's this button here that's got YY. So you're comparing them. Not a huge amount of processing, but I think you can see that image, the after image, pops a bit more. It's a bit warmer, a bit more color. So quite happy with that one. So now a quick look at this image in the mountains. Quite different from the lighthouse image. Probably a completely different style of processing. But again, I'll go back to kind of my fundamentals. Always come and click these two buttons in lens correction. So kind of fundamentally correct from the outset. Bit different cropping, because obviously there's no horizon to measure against. So I'm just using what I know as a kind of some kind of guides in the landscape. I'm looking at the mountains, thinking, does it look straight? Does it look balanced? If it was like that, I'd think actually, kind of, why is Snowdon leaning so much? So I'm actually not going to do anything to that image. So close down, no cropping in this image. Again, next step for me is to just look at the whites and the blacks. So again, I'm going to click on the slider, click Alt, and then just boost the whites until you can see they start to creep in the top right hand corner there. So just drop them down a little bit, and same with the blacks. Go in the other direction. Want to get to a point, so you might not be able to see this on the screen. I'll go further so you can see the blacks start to creep in. So just pull that back so it's got relatively even exposure, and I've got enough detail coming out of the shadow so you can see what's going on there. In this case, I'm now going to go to clarity because I don't think it needs too much of a boost in clarity. So again, just clicking on the slider and using the arrow keys. Similar with vibrance. Don't want to go too much, but I want a bit more color in the grass and kind of the mountainside. So I might be a bit more adventurous with this vibrance. Just go a little bit, and then again about the similar amount in saturation, just so you get the colors popping out a bit more. So I'll close down basic. Come to tone curve, so you can see, hopefully you can see these peaks in my histogram. There's quite a lot of shadow showing up here, and I'll show you what happens if there's this line that runs through the histogram. If I click and hold the line and then boost that line, you can see the shadows start to disappear. Now I absolutely don't want that because it starts to give it a really washed out look. So I'll just drop the line back to where it was, but there might be some scope over in the lighter part of the histogram just to make a few minor alterations. So I'm going to click there, just drop down. And now the danger is when you're doing this that you look at the histogram rather than the image. Look at the image and see what's happening. Just adding a little bit of a bit more pop into that. So I'll hopefully this shows up. So hopefully you can see the difference in the clouds. It's just adding a bit more detail into the clouds. Hope you can see that. Hope that all makes sense. So close down tone curve. I'm going to have a look at my colors. Obviously, dominant color in the sky here is blue. So just have a little play with the blue. look more saturation, makes the sky a little bit darker, and dominant colors here in the mountains are greens and yellows, so maybe a little bit of added green, a little bit of boost to the green, make it look a bit more like it looked in real life. Tiny little bit of yellow, and although not too yellow, because it will kind of make the image look like something from the 1970s. And now I just go back from a basic panel, little bit of added contrast, so not too much, just enough. Don't think I need to. No, the exposure, maybe drop exposure a tiny little bit, just to add a bit more drama over here on the ridge here. And then I don't think in this image, I don't think temperature is going to add anything. So I'll have a look. Now you see, if I start to move temperature, it does start to look like an image taken kind of radioactive time or the cold winter. I think the reason that temperature doesn't have any positive outcome here is because the predominant colours are yellows and greens, and the temperature tends to accentuate the yellows. So probably finished in kind of the basic controls. I've looked at tone curve, looked at colour, just coming to detail again. Not interested in sharpening any of this grass. It just wouldn't happen, but would be nice just to have a bit more of a definition along the kind of the ridge. So I'm going to push my sharpening up to about midway, but then again, go to masking, click Alt, shoot along until I get to a point where it's really just, so you can see now essentially it's just the ridge that is being sharpened. Tiny little bit of noise, so just push the noise up a little bit, but not too much. You expect a little bit of noise in a landscape image. And then I've already dealt with lens corrections, so overall quite happy. One of the things I am looking at is this sky looks a little bit too bright for me, so one of the tools I will sometimes use with the sky, just come over here up at the top. Hopefully you can see my cursor flying around there. There's the gradient filter in the middle of the rectangle. Just going to click that, you get a cross comes up, click above the image, drag that down. Looks like a kind of set of Venetian blinds or something. Drag that down so the middle piece is covering the sky off. And then what this allows you to do is all of those controls that I've just looked at, but it only applies to the area that you've added the filter, and also it works in a kind of graduated way. So if you watch, I'll drop exposure down, you'll see that the exposure is darker at the top. So hopefully that makes sense. It works a little bit like a digital graduated filter. So I am just going to take a little bit of the brightness out of the sky, not too much, but I think that's quite nice. And I think I'm done. I don't like processing, so I tend to do as little as possible, but hopefully you can see the benefit. I'll just do the before and after side by side because I prefer to see the side by side. So hopefully you can see the image on the right. It's got much more pop and more dynamic colors than the image on the left. But without spending a long time going into the detail. I would typically, on each image, only spend a couple of minutes. In fact, I do get annoyed that if it takes too much processing, I probably just delete them because I can't be doing with it. But hopefully you can see a nice contrast between the two. I'll give you that view just so you can see. So that's my processing.
Well, there you go, post-processing done. 2 images. I decided to do 2, so it gives you a slightly different flavour of what I do. As I said earlier, every image is different, so every image needs to be processed slightly differently. But hopefully that gave you an idea about the way in which I process. As I said, I think when I was recording, I don't like processing all that much. So I try and do the bare minimum. I'd rather get it right in camera and do the bare minimum. So hopefully that gives you an idea though of kind of the processes I use in Lightroom. If you liked that video, if you thought it was useful, let me know, because I'll do more as I take more images and something different. So I've done obviously a coastal shot and a mountain scene, but as I take more images across the summer and into the autumn, if you're interested, I'll post some more. Let me know. Really appreciate any feedback that you've got if you put that in the comments below. Thanks for all the likes and all the subscribers. Hope you enjoyed the film, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers.